Hi, I'm John Stevens.
This is Matt Russell.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.
This is Pod Have Mercy.
We start our podcast this week with our masks on because even though I'm taking it off. We are socially distanced, physically distanced in these things. It may look like we're close, but we're like more than 6 feet apart. So this week we're going to be visiting with Marc. Matt and I are going to be doing that, and we're joined by Josef Klam, who still has his mask on. He was our executive pastor, but Josef's also on the board of trustees, the school board here for Spring Branch Independent School District. And so I invited Josef to be a part of that conversation since he's really involved in all of that. So I'm really excited that you're going to get to hear Marc and all of us just share some information about all that's going on. Yeah. You know, I'm a pastor, and I want to have church. Josef is with us today. You know, he's a pastor. He wants to have church, but he's also on school board, and I know that Josef is getting hammered all over the place. Let's talk about gatherings. Let's talk about schools. Let's talk about church. You know, we talk about this is a really big thing now. And as I was texting you last week, it's really hard. I mean, I can say to people, well, we're going to hold off on church because we want to help businesses stay open. We want to help schools open. And people can go, okay, I get that. But once schools open, then people are going to go, well, hey, if school's a gathering, why can't we have church? Or if you're going to, I mean, if we start having funerals or you see them on TV of funerals or things like that, it becomes a really difficult thing. And I think, as you and I have talked about before, you have to be able to manage within this pandemic rather than just shut everything down. What do you think about gatherings? Or let's just start with school. I know Joseph's going to have a couple of questions around that.
You know, let me be clear. I've talked about this before. I'm an and person. I am not somebody in the camp of saying, you know, the answer's or, you can't do, you know, which basically is a no, you can't do things. We need to figure out how to coexist with the virus, but we can't coexist well with the virus when it's at very high levels. And we've seen around the world, people are able to bring it down. Now, it's always fits and starts and challenges whenever you start easing restrictions. I mean, that's just a given, right? So, you know, first and foremost, masks to me should be mandatory. We should all be wearing them in all these settings, frankly, through, you know, the time where we start to see this virus significantly go down, probably with a vaccine. Maybe there's a time we can bring that back down sooner if we really drive this down. But frankly, it's such a small sacrifice to make in most settings. I would urge that we use them in most settings. Gatherings are really tough. So let's talk about, you know, less important gatherings. And this is where we have to have some societal discussion, right? I would argue that the most important thing for us societally is to educate our children right now and get our children back to school. I don't think football, as much as I love watching football, is as important as getting our children back to school, for example. So when I hear UT, where I went, or Texas A&M talking about putting half-full stadiums together, I shudder, because that is just a recipe for real problems. And I think we're ending up doing things like that are going to be at the expense of our children's education. So I think we societally have to prioritize. And I, for one, would argue that schools have to be the number one priority right now. So if we want to get back to school, I talked about some of the numbers, you know, that we need to get back to. I think that needs to be our principal goal. And I think most other areas of society, we should say, let's pause. Let's not do anything that advances. We don't retreat, but let's not do anything else that increases the connectivity of people while we're trying to get to a point where it's safe to open up schools. You will have seen one of the school districts last night said it's going back in person this month. I completely disagree with that for a number of reasons. The first of which, for one school district to do that while everybody else doesn't do that, is just wholly unfair. We should have a societal standard that we all agree to and figure out how to do this. So I'm concerned about kind of the direction that's been given, which is, you know, we'll just make this decision school district by school district. Because the challenge with that is we're all so interconnected. What makes one school district able to do that versus another? And then when one goes, everybody else is like, well, heck, I might as well go. You know, it's sort of like the restaurant check. It's like, well, if we're splitting the restaurant check in 20 people, I might as well order more because he's doing that over there. You know, and you know, we've all been there, right? So we have to have discipline around this. Because if we're at this kind of level, there's no way we're going to get schools back together safely and not have a big uptick in the virus. So if we get to the levels low enough, though, I'm wholly in favor of getting kids back to school. It's number one priority. The American Academy of Pediatrics has been, go Google and look up their statement. It's really good. In bold, it basically says we need to get back to in-person education, and all policies should be planned around that. But it says that after it says, but to get there, we have to be safe and have the virus in control and all, figure out a lot of different things that need to happen at the schools. So, I strongly hope that we can get kids back to school kind of, in-person learning, somewhere around October. I personally certainly don't think it's an August timeframe. And I think just looking at the numbers, it's going to be challenging in September. So what I would say societally is let's set a goal of that and let's figure out how we work together and make the sacrifices and watch that R and watch those numbers, bring those numbers down so we can get schools open safely. The little kids, are the ones who distance learn probably the worst, right? It's hard to teach a 6-year-old through distance learning compared to a 15-year-old who does, a lot more independent study and things like that. So we should be figuring out, in my mind, how then do you start with some of the younger kids who may be more vulnerable and more issues, with distance learning. And thankfully the data around the world suggest at least that the younger kids don't communicate the virus as effectively as adults do, or teenagers look just like adults. Now that's fuzzy data that could change, when you talk about all the data that's out there, but at least it's suggestive, which is good news because they're, unlike the flu, where honestly the first playbook for pandemic flu is shut all the schools. Because you look at a regular flu season, most flu kind of gets disseminated through kids. That's not the way this virus appears to work, which is a good news in terms of getting kids back to school. So hopefully that's where we can be. That's what I would urge. I've talked to a number of school districts, private schools, others. As I said at the Texas Medical Center, we're trying to put some goals out there, not specifically around schools, but just, hey, community, this is what we need to get to. These are the goals we need to seek out and work together to get to in terms of keeping this virus in control.
Joseph?
Yeah, I really appreciate this part of the conversation. There are a lot of differing opinions, obviously, of everyone will agree of the value and importance of getting kids back in person, but also looking, school systems have, it's not just the young kids or the teenagers. You have all your faculty and staff. And so kind of really prioritizing as a community that we're all doing our part to get things back kind of in line with what they need to be so that we can safely get kids back to school. There's, you mentioned earlier the politicization. Just say it real quick and mumble it, and it sounds right.
Politics.
The politics around some of the language being used. Yeah. And it seems like that now education has become one of the pawns in the political realm, right? Of saying, if you are for shutting down and keeping kids out of school, there are other more evil motives behind that, right? And if you're about getting kids back into school, it's there's other motives around that. Right now, we have a battle between state and county around education. We have officials on the county side, Dr. Shaw, making recommendations. Do you know what factors and data they're using? I mean, you've mentioned several of the data, but there's been kind of fuzziness around, well, what contributing factors is the county looking at when they make orders across the board like that?
Yeah, obviously, let me start on the political side because, whether you're talking masks or now whether you're talking the hot topic of schools, the politicization of it. Hey, I got it out.
You're a doctor.
It's a hard word, but it has been so frustrating because again, like in most things, I'm pretty pragmatic. Neither extreme end of that argument is probably correct, right? And certainly, what I would expect of our political leaders is unity. I would expect during a time like this, which is like war, where we all have to come together and make common sacrifice to do the right things. We should have those different groups working together to say, let's negotiate and come to a common agreement and understanding. And that, of course, is not what's been happening societally. It's not what's happened, in many other things. Unfortunately, having this virus happen in an election year was a lot worse than having it happen in a non-election year, and having it happen in a presidential election year where the stakes are so high couldn't have been worse timing. I'm just going to be blunt, because both parties have chosen sort of political angles to questions that oftentimes are much more clinical, medical, scientific, as to the best of the understanding that's out there. And so what I really want is our county and city officials and our state officials to get together and say, this is how we're going to agree to manage this and organize this. And unfortunately, that hasn't been what happened. I think what we heard from the governor now is that, the city and county really don't have a say-so over it, and it's a local school decision, a school district decision, and, the challenge with that is you're pulling the health officials out of it,
right.
Whether city or county, and yes, they're city county. So by definition, they're part of a public, but also a political arm of what we're doing. But now you're turning over to each and every school district. And as I said, so when one school district makes that decision and it's right next door to another school district that makes the other, how is that what we should be doing from a unification, from a unity purpose? As a community of Texans, a community of Houstonians, we should come to a consensus around the best and safest way to do this, and then lock arms and have all of the school districts work together. That may still be sequencing, it may be phasing, it may be one that says, hey, we'll volunteer to test some of this out first. But, that's not what's happening now. And unfortunately, it's problematic. It's very problematic. My prediction, not maybe at a one school district level, but when you take a bunch of kids and you put them back in school with a virus level we see now, we run significant risk of seeing that almost on a dime go back out of control and, being in a very challenging situation. And then you have a high probability of shutting down the schools for a long period of time.
Wow.
It's one of those things to me, if we can be a little patient and we can all focus on the goals of getting the virus down, then we can do this in a more sustainable fashion. Now, anybody who thinks we're going to open up schools without some fits and starts is obviously wrong. We will have a classroom outbreak. We will have a school outbreak. If you look at a school district, I know you mentioned you're on one of the school district boards. There will be an elementary school that has to shut down. Whatever. There will be some school that will have a challenge. There will be some part. So most of the best back to school practices I'm hearing about and seeing about and discussing with school leaders, cohort children. So you don't have them running all over the school. You put kids together, in a setting with teachers. And so if 2 kids end up positive there, you may shut down a cohort, but you don't have to shut down the whole school necessarily. Lots of activities like that. There's smart things that can be done. Just as we've seen at the hospital, when you understand how to manage things, you can bring people to work and do that safely, and care for people safely over, long periods of time. We can do the same thing in schools, but it's going to require, a lot of challenging, dynamics and a lot of common, purpose.
Well, and I think that's what's important to recognize, that when we talk about turning schools back on, we're not talking about starting the 2021 school year like we did the 1920. That it's not the big assemblies, the big back to school nights with parents. That this is a different model. And so just like we learned in the hospital systems that there are certain things that you start to add filters and layers of protection that shift the numbers down. And so that's where, I'm assuming that you think that mask in, not just on campus in travel, but even within the classrooms are a smart thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When I talk to some of my friends who are educators, they say, even though some of the masking orders really, I think, start at third-ish grade or something like that. I don't remember the exact details, but what they say is I can take a 6-year-old, and if I tell a 6-year-old to wear a mask, the 6-year-old's going to wear a mask. They're a lot easier than a 15-year-old, right? So, And so absolutely make it fun, figure out the games around it. And it just is what we do. Yes, it's disruptive, but if we can protect those kids and, protect the families they go home to and protect the teachers. I mean, remember, we're going to have, we have a lot of teachers who are really scared about going back to work. I will tell you when, we sort of shut everything down and did just the, the essential work. So we had a cadre of people who were coming to work every day and a whole bunch of people who stayed home, right? I mean, all these operations stopped. So all the operating room nurses, all the technicians there, the mammography, I mean, all these different areas. And, we had a lot of people scared to come back to work early on, and we worked with them, we educated them, and, we've shown that it can be done very, very safely, throughout that time. Right now, you're dealing with a lot of teachers who are understandably so saying, hold on a second, I'm 60 years old. I'm not at zero risk. And, your kids may be most likely fine, but I'm not. And I'm worried about that. And they have a very valid point. And so we have to find a way to protect each of them. We have to find a way to protect the children. I think it's very doable, but almost nothing is doable when the virus is, in terms of advancing things forward, is doable when the virus is at the level we're still seeing here in the community. So we have to bring that down.
Well, you keep talking about the virus at a level, and we need to bring it down before we turn things on. So, and you may have said this, and I missed it, but for you, then, what's that target number? I mean, for you, generally speaking, even if you were going to give a little grace up or down.
Sure. So right now we're seeing about 2,000 cases diagnosed daily across the greater Houston area. When we were in May and things were going pretty well, as a whole bunch of stuff opened up pretty significantly and really did not cause a big uptick. The big uptick happened probably an accumulation of some of those things, but I think more so sort of, the personal frustration and fatigue with quarantining and fatigue with other things. We weren't wearing masks when we should have. We're getting all sorts of conflicting messages. That's really when it upticked, right with Memorial Day and going into summer. So I still firmly believe we can advance things ultimately when the virus is at low levels if we all do our part. Now that takes 90+% of people wearing their masks when they should be wearing their masks, for instance. I'd like to see, and what we're discussing across the Texas Medical Center, you'll probably see on a dashboard as an aspirational goal for the community to get this virus in control, is probably somewhere on the order of 200 cases a day or so. We were there. We've been there before in May. We were there for weeks at the end of April and first half of May. So it is doable. But to do that, we have a lot of work to do as a community to get that back down.
And that's before, you would suggest those levels before we go back to in-person school?
Most likely, yes.
Or gatherings.
Obviously, if the trajectory is really steep and we're getting close, there may be some piloting and things that happen a little earlier than that. But yeah, I think you're going to need to be in that range. Because we know from that range, over the course of about 2 to 3 weeks, we had an explosion across the community up to, peak of 26, 27, 2,800 cases a day. And hospitals, that were severely challenged, obviously all the impact that is a result of that. We know that can happen very, very rapidly. You wake up one day, you start looking at the numbers going back, and that you've got, at best case, if you could, dramatically change things that day on a dime, it's 2 weeks before you see the impact. So once you see that going up, you've got 2 weeks. And, in about 3, we probably went from, 100-ish cases at Methodist, for instance, to 700. That was, like that. And that is an extreme challenge, as you can imagine.
Wow.
So you're saying it's achievable, but it sounds extremely ambitious. And I don't know, this year has not increased my confidence in humanity. As a pastor, I believe
I've said that a few times as well. So,
I believe in redemption and I believe in salvation still to this day. But man, I'm telling you what, I don't know.
The Presbyterians have this total depravity
There's a few
idea.
People that need to do a little confessional around some of the community.
So I guess the question is, the numbers are going down, but we're a long way from 200 cases a day.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe even if it kept, and this is a really good trend, but it would still need to be a pretty good while before we got there to that number.
I think it's October, honestly. So if you look at HISD decided to go, virtual, in early September, and then tentatively going in person in October. I think that should be our goal to try to get there. I think that's a challenging goal. I think anybody else looking much earlier than that, it's going to be problematic. It's going to be really challenging.
Well, you mentioned one district. I won't name them. They know who they are. That's going back, and I don't even know that they're requiring masking when they're in the classroom. So
I don't know the details. I would hope they.
I don't either, and I hope not. But I know here in Spring Branch ISD, which Joseph's on, and he, their plan was to start and give people the choice, and now I think you've delayed that a little bit.
Yeah, it's beginning virtually in August, and which will be a different experience than most people experienced last year. And I think that's a part of the conversation last spring when schools shut down. Every district did their very best to get some type of salvage something out of the spring.
Right.
And so the online experience varied from family to family, even within a district, but it definitely varied from district to district. And I know every single district across the state, particularly in our region, have worked diligently to make sure that the online experience would be different this fall. But also recognizing that there's still different learning styles and different levels of risk aversion that families are really wanting. So the plan was then to have choice, and so we're getting a mix of folks who desire the in-person experience and those who are kind of prepared to start at least with in-person. And that plan right now is ambitious with a September 8th after Labor Day to begin the choice plan. Where I think it gets tricky is you can look zip code to zip code at some of the cases that are coming, and we're compared to an HISD, we're a dwarf. We're dwarfed by them in their size, but still have 35,000 students that are spread across different socioeconomic, different, just all different types of factors that all contribute. And so we're trying to make sure that we can encourage our community to do the stuff now, because we're early August. Do the stuff now that puts us in a position that we can do that and fulfill that educational promise that so many of our families do still want, which is that in-person experience. Which I really appreciate, your opinion to take things like football into consideration, because I know that may not be a majority opinion for some in our state as to where football should rank in the educational experience, particularly when you get into college football.
Yeah.
So well, and again, we're seeing it with baseball, right? They've found a way to play.
Yep.
So it's not that some of these universities, for example, or high schools for that matter, can't find a way to play safely. It's another issue to be watching in the stands. So take
That's right.
Professional sports, right? I've watched some baseball. It's a little weird watching the empty stands, but at the end of the day, I'm watching baseball. It's a heck of a lot better than the alternative. Yeah. And even there, of course, we've seen some challenges, right, with a couple teams that have some outbreaks. And when you hear why they have outbreaks, it's probably personal behavior out, off the field that's happening. And then you go to the university level. I'm hearing these discussions about, having 50,000 people in a stadium, and I'm like, what planet are people discussing that on? Because I don't know how you possibly can put 50,000 people in a stadium and think that you're somehow going to have a safe event, and yet you could still have those football games and broadcast them. Again, high school gets more challenging. I get all that, and obviously the athletic experience for our children, the arts experience for our children, and that's all part of education. There's no question. But, call me a traditionalist. The most important part of our kids' education is, reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? We need to get them education. And some of those other pieces we need to try very mightily to do, but some of them may have to take a little bit of a back seat to saying our kids need to be prepared intellectually for their future success.
Yeah, I leave tomorrow morning to drive my middle daughter up to college. She's going to be a freshman at Auburn University. And I've been really impressed with a lot of the things that they've put in place. And Alabama has a statewide mask order, but I was shocked to see, I guess I shouldn't, it's SEC football, right? But their plan is that they'll have students in the stands, but they'll be wearing masks. And I just thought it was interesting that that's still, as of the last announcement, that was their plan.
Yeah.
Those kinds of decisions concern me greatly, right? Because I mean, if we, I've said kind of a million times in a bunch of settings, I mean, we need unity as a country to figure out some of these questions and have this good dialogue and debate and everything else. We then need to figure out how to prioritize, and we need to ultimately sacrifice on the social life side. I mean, our social lives to get, those important purposes of an economy that's functioning and schools that are educating our children have to be able to happen. And I don't know how we get there without some individual and collective sacrifice. Some of that's wearing masks and the frustration of that. A lot of that is cutting way back on social activities and thinking creatively and how to do them differently. Sports are a perfect example for that. I think Major League Baseball's done a pretty good job so far, and they've brought us, put away all the fights in terms of the union and the negotiations. But once they got playing, we've got some entertainment to watch and can watch that on TV. It beats the alternative. And there's got to be some ways, that I can watch my Longhorns play, for instance, that you don't have to have a stadium full of kids, potentially getting each other sick. I mean, 50,000 people together is a crazy idea in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah, Mark, Matt, I don't want to wind this up because I want to be faithful to your time. Matt Russell is actually going to go get on a call with the city council about advocating for additional rent relief for people in the community, which is good work. But I think you had one last question.
Yeah, I've heard you say a couple times this the phrase about collective sacrifice, which I think is super important. And there's some, like the question John asked about particular numbers. Those seem to be not opinion driven, but data driven for what we're seeing the best outcomes. And then I hear things about people's personal risk aversion, and those seem to run counter to each other. It seems that if, and I may be making this up, that if you were in charge of the world, in a sense that you would say, hey folks, we got to look at this number. We need to grieve and to do all of our other stuff around this, but once we get this number at a good place and we collectively sacrifice, we can open up. But if we don't, really the consequences are going to be far greater if we don't do this. So it's not a draconian measure because we're trying to hurt folks. It's actually, if we don't do these things collectively as a society, we're going to be having these discussions, and we're putting our children at far greater risk if we all just kind of decide what our own personal risk aversion is, and we make those decisions based on that. Is that a correct way of?
It's a very fair way to say that. Look, at the end of the day, none of us wanted this virus to happen. I like it. I've told people before, I feel society like we seem to be acting like this is the Vietnam War instead of acting like it's World War II, right? World War II, we all had a common enemy. We got attacked. We said, let's go make the sacrifices and we'll do what we have to do. And we did it for 4 long years, plus some lead up and of course rebuilding and everything else. But, the war itself lasted not quite 4 years, right? Until VJ Day. And even then there was wind down and lots of sacrifice after that happened. In Vietnam, we couldn't decide, did we have an enemy? Why were we fighting? What were we doing? Who attacked, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this is real clear cut. I mean, this virus attacks everybody, and it doesn't care who you are, what you look like, where you're from, what country you're in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a common enemy. So we need to be bonding together as one people, humankind, basically say, let's fight this thing, and let's fight this thing with unity. And we just haven't done that, and it's very difficult.
Well, Mark, I'm going to let Matt scoot out of here and go get on his call that he needs to do. And I want to let you go too. And I really do hope you have a good trip to I'm actually going to Colorado the last week of August for my first little getaway that since this whole thing. It's funny to me how everybody says, well, it's a pandemic, you're not really doing much. And I have found my anxiety and mental health I've always thought of myself a very strong person in all those areas. But I mean, it really, even good news when it comes, like a daughter's engagement, you just feel anxiety about everything. And so I can imagine what all the people are going through. I hope that we can do it, because I'm with you. I think getting our kids back in school, and that's what I've been telling folks, to have patience with us on gathering and worship. If the weather were a little cooler, we could go out. We have a huge back field. we
That'd
could
be great.
draw
Yep.
circles in the ground and put it up, and we may do it anyway. I told someone that it was last night at 8:30. It was 100-degree heat index, but they said they were ready to come sweat for Jesus. So, it may not be a lot of people that may be an option we have to look at for a while, because if we can do our part to help the schools open up, we can worship online, and people, it may not be the same as being in present, but some of these kids need to be in the classroom. My niece came this weekend for the engagement party, and she is a special ed, starting her first job in Gwinnett County in Atlanta, which they're virtual all year. And she's explaining the difficulties of educating special needs students in virtual means. It's almost impossible, especially for a speech therapist. And so, whatever we can do, I think we all need to be ready to do it, and I just hope and pray we can. So thank you so much. Any last parting word of wisdom from you?
We've had a great talk here. Thanks for the time. Thanks to everybody. We still feel just tremendous, palpable support from everybody, and prayers and support and donations and cookies and meals and thank yous, and all of that means so much to our staff who are working so hard. As I said, we're thankfully a little slower now, so we're starting to figure out how to tap people on the shoulder and say, go get a week or two off, as we know that they're still in it for a long marathon. So,
well, I know you've got great chaplains
support.
and great doctors and great staff, and we appreciate all you do and all the hospitals do. We are fortunate to be in one of the best medical cities
Amen to that.
in the world.
Amen to that. Hey, after Hurricane Harvey, I remember visiting some of our church members up at Methodist and seeing everyone in a blue shirt with an outline of Texas that says, "Together we heal."
We heal. Yep.
And I just thought that was so phenomenal. And I don't know if you have a round 2 shirt that's out there for your staff and employees, but the overwhelming sense I got from this call is it's not just even within the hospital; it's every aspect of our society. Together, we heal. And I know we are in a world that desperately needs some healing. So thanks for today.
Well, Joseph is a Longhorn too. I know the Aggies will hate it, but I'll put my horns up and say, hook 'em just for you guys, because you're so special.
That's just for the Aggies out there.
All right, now I'm going to get hate mail.
Talk about politicization.
Thank you, Mark, so much. Take care.
Good to see everybody. Thanks so much.
All right. Well, Mr. School Board.
Yeah.
We
still recording?
Oh, yeah, we keep recording forever.
Good.
We debrief. Although without Matt today, because he had to step out to do his call. But, wow. Something about this pandemic, just emotionally, it's the rise and fall of the numbers of cases matches the rise and fall of mental anguish. You think, hey, school's going to start. That's great. And then you go, oh, we really need to see the numbers in this area. And then you go, we're not anywhere close to the numbers in those areas. And it's just for people to be all over the map. I guarantee you there'll be people that will, some folks that'll say, man, I love Mark, it's great. And other people will say he's biased or he's this, or they'll try to discount what he says. And I always tell people when they say, well, Texas Medical Center, they got their own agenda. I'm like, yeah, it's like keeping you safe. Next time something goes wrong with you, where are you going to go?
That's exactly
you
right.
want to go down there, right?
Yeah.
It's difficult, and I don't envy you or school board or any school board these days.
It's this is a hard. There's no right answer. That a single right answer that fits every system, that fits every community, that fits every context, and that also means that there's no wrong answer. There can be more wrong and more right. The problem that we have is that a lot of this stuff is being made on the fly. So he talks about this kind of 2 week. He can see there's these lagging indicators and these all right, well, we've seen over the last couple of weeks these numbers come down on the dashboard that they have. Well, I'm can be hopeful that we're going to still see those trends go down, and at any given moment you can have a jump and a spike that throws everything off. We have an incredibly divided culture right now about everything. It's easier to be divided and just remain divided than ever come to this middle ground. So this idea that Dr. Boom talked about, where it'd been great if you had county, local, city, and state all getting on the same page and having this strategy and plan. It'd been great. We saw it when we had local orders put in place for masks, and then we had state voice come in and say, no, you don't have the authority to come in and do that. And then, we see numbers
within the state,
and then the state comes back and says, no, you got to wear a mask. And so,
and in fairness to everybody, some people want to pick on the county judge or the governor or whatever. It's like
everyone's in it.
This is not like anything we've ever faced before.
No,
and
that's
so the decision you make in March or in April or in May or in June, based on what that's in front of you. And so it does change. I don't have any people who attack people because they change their position. I don't understand that in our society, because if that ought to be a noble and wonderful thing that you're willing to say, even Mark said early on, not a big fan of masks because people touch it and then they touch their face. Well, even the CDC said that early on. Then they said, all right, this thing's getting out of control. It's worth that potential risk. It's better to have the mask than not. So they've all come along on this. And, we've just got to be willing to say, yeah, we changed our mind. We thought we were going to start August 17th or 10th or whatever it was. We're not going to do that. We thought we were going to come back on September 8th. We may need to wait a little longer. I don't know what it'll look like. And I know it's really hard for people mentally, psychologically, spiritually. And we are living life in separation. One thing I know about relationships is when you are separated from people, when you are removed from relationships, there's more suspicion that grows. If you think about ever having a long distance relationship, all of our relationships these days are long distance relationships, even if we are in the same city. We are living distanced from one another. And so suspicion arises, doubt arises, assumptions arise, all these things, because we're not sitting there in a room in community with one another, dialoguing, giving and taking. And I find that whenever someone is mad about something or questioning, if I can ever have that phone call or that sit down or whatever it is, not email and text, right? A real living conversation, then we're able to at least go, you know what, okay, I don't agree with everything, but I get it, and they're in a much different place than when we relate long distance. And that is not going to fix itself unless all of us understand that. That's the difficulty.
And I think we can't overestimate the power of trauma and how widespread it is. I mean, it seems as if everyone is living through this season differently at different levels of traumatic experience. And so I've had conversations with individuals that have talked about the uncertainty about school starting has their kids and themselves as parents in tears on a regular basis. And you start to process and realize, well, it's almost like there's constant PTSD every time that there's a discussion about it's not going to happen when you think it's going to happen. It slaps you back in the face, and it's like a gut punch when you're like, I thought I knew what we were going to be doing. And so I think so many folks long for the certainty of, what date are we going to be back at church? Like, we want to know the date, and the reluctance to put out the date because there's so much that could happen between now and that date.
Well, we put out a date, and then we had to not
and
do
then
the
we had
date.
to pull back the date, and it's constant
I'll tell
trauma.
you one thing that really blessed me this week, and my daughter, one of my young Matt, got to be a part of this. We got an email from a mom whose kid is going off to college, and this spring we didn't get to do senior Sunday and graduate Sunday, and celebration with the luncheon and them all coming in back. We didn't get to do that, and then a lot of them didn't get to do their graduation or had to do it removed, or it's been very disruptive. But I got an email from a mom, and our youth staff and others went to the homes of those who were going off to college with not only a gift bag and some stuff for them, but then just, distanced wise, had a prayer with them. And, one mom was just like, I know we've missed so much, but this was so meaningful. And there you again, you're reducing the long distance relationship. If we can figure out how to do that, I think we can make it, but we've got to work hard.
Yeah. Pastor Sarah Barnett was at our place on Sunday afternoon with your daughter,
Yes.
blessing our family, in particular my Madeline. And let me tell you, they came in, they had masks on, they removed the barrier of doing something online by coming into the house, not touching anything, but just being present.
Mm-hmm.
It was incredibly powerful, and for me, that's when I see things that, well, look, God is still at work. God is at work, and things are blossoming, and we can see things that, like, we're going to keep that because as a parent, it was incredibly meaningful.
Well, I'm John Stevens.
I'm Joseph Klam.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.